When you engage a vendor, can the clients, for example, a bank or someone who engaged a vendor, do something about it when it goes wrong? The answer is yes, because this is where CISO comes into the picture. They start off the entire engagement by assessing the risk, and then comes the implementation stage, and then the legal department is also involved. So the answer is yes, you can always indemnify against the risk involved by going to the core of the contract itself, and the involvement of legal department and also CISO, they work hand in hand, and yeah, you can indemnify. Okay. Under the existing and prevailing laws, there are civil remedies, there are also criminal sanction, and yes, to answer, yes, you can do it.
Try using Microsoft today. The first thing you do is you get a EULA on your page, you click accept, and you're at their mercy. If you happen to use their software and you get a vulnerability, you get hacked, why don't you contact Microsoft and say, guys, pay me, man, because I bought your software, you're supposed to pay me back, because now I got hacked because of you. Does it work like that, Vignesh?
Not so much so, because you have to understand what do you procure as a service from the supplier, right? You have to ensure that the supplier adheres to the same level of security that you want. And that's what we hope. But we put it in our thought and we don't put it into writing. So when the shit hits the ceiling and we think we can get it off from the supplier, actually we don't, because we never spelled it out. So the best thing when you do, when you go to the lawyers, first thing they pull out the contract, you never told me to do this. So I'm not obliged to do this. I've tried my best, and that's what you...
Yes, the scenario is simple. You know, a company or an enterprise looks at outsourcing only when they find that it makes economically viable to do it outside than inside, right? That's when you would also look into the risks. Look at the risks. And those risks, at that time, you would also craft the liabilities and indemnities, whatever it is included in the contract. It needs to be really spelled out. Specifically, you know, when you are making a contract or an engagement with a third party, yeah, you also accept certain risks that are associated with that, right? And that's one the organization needs to understand in case of a service that is going and getting impacted. In case of an incident like this, unwanted incident, that also could be looked into, and the contractual clauses can be baked in to protect both interests. It should be mutually binding, not one-sided.
So, well, first of all, just to clarify, before that I was the head of information risk for Barclays in Europe, in Asia, so I was on the side where I was subscribing services. I just want to add something which is really important. Of course, we heard that these service level agreements, we can get legal opinions from the lawyer or advocate. What is the most important thing in outsourcing agreement? And I've done that a lot with Barclays because we outsource a lot of services. There's two types of outsourcing. You have outsourcing to a third party, but you also have outsourcing to another part or another branch of your own company called intragroup. And actually, because there are two separate entities, it's considered as outsourcing as well, and either from a regulatory viewpoint. So it's very important that you can spot that even if you outsource your service to your entity based in Malaysia and you're based in Singapore, then you fall under the outsourcing. That's very important. So in order to do that, and I think the biggest challenge for the CISO is to get visibility on outsourcing. How you get aware that you have an outsourcing activities, because you're not responsible sometimes or not the owner of this outsourcing project. So as a CISO, I think what is the most important thing is to come up with a governance framework that will define how you engage with the business, how the business engage with you, and let you know in a timely manner that, oh, I have an outsourcing project. Then this is where you come with a repeatable process where you have to assess, of course, the risk and the requirements. So you have your control, you have your policy, you have your standard, and you have the regulatory requirements. So you need to do this mapping and establish a repeatable process where you have a form that defines which control are mandatory, which control are nice to have. And this will define the baseline of your agreement. So as now I'm not a buyer anymore and I'm more a seller, what I would expect from a bank or one of my clients is to come up with their requirements. So I will not only assess what are the policy and standard they have, I will also understand what are the jurisdiction they are operating. Because for me, there's nothing worse not be compliant with the regulatory requirement. So I will do my best to understand and scope the risk with the client, and subsequently we'll draft a contract based on these inputs. From a vendor viewpoint, what we put in this EULA is that if my software get hacked or any software get hacked, I cannot be held accountable as such. However, I have clear obligation. Like if I find the vulnerabilities, I have the obligation to respond and acknowledge these vulnerabilities in 24 hours. I have the responsibility to patch my software within 30 days. I have the responsibility to advertise and communicate to all my clients that I find the vulnerabilities. So I come up with some requirements that are very transparent at the contractual level. So both from a EULA and service level agreement. That's very important. The other important thing is from a CISO viewpoint is when you subscribe a service, we tend to believe that you outsource the risk as well. But actually, it's not true, because you only outsource the control that you need to operate. So the responsibility is most of the time held by the third party, but the accountability remain with you, not necessarily with you as a CISO, but remain with your organization. So you need to make sure that you state your requirement right away at the business engagement. And what I suggest to do for any organization is you most likely have SDLC process in place, software development lifecycle. So as such, you should do outsourcing lifecycle, where you have a committee that review every third party and set up a baseline that any third party have the same requirement toward the organization.
We talked about buying a lot of products, a lot of applications and software, but we don't look that we also outsource hosting services, where we keep our data out there. Mm-hmm. We also outsource or buy in people services. So we get external parties work for us as employees. And these are also outsourced parties that we looked into and pose a risk as well. So for any outsourcing party that we engage with, the key thing that we look at in terms of accreditation of the organization is, do they manage any standards? So that would tell us that the organization has a mindset, the management adheres to certain practices, and they will maintain that certification. Because the chances of any organization going audit our supplier and getting any proof they violated anything is far less. So an independent party can do that on our terms. So that's the first thing that we look into. The other part is how much they value the business to us. That's something that we look to. So these are two things that we'd like to see.
Time when you are including a vendor in a particular product or service that you are offering, certain things need to be looked at. One is their service delivery capability. How is their service, example like if your product is a 24/7, our service is 24/7, does the vendor offer a similar thing as a 24/7? Or does he have that geopolitical, rather locational advantage which can cover that 24/7 and things like that, right? Second is about their ability to comply to some of the cybersecurity related things like maintaining confidentiality, integrity and availability of your services that you are offering, that you are consuming. Their intellectual property handling, how are they handling the data that is intellectual data that is coming out of your agreements, your services, right? Other things like, do they have a reasonable business continuity? Not IT disaster recovery, but more of business continuity. If one location fails, then can they scale back to other location and things like that. Regulatory and legal related matters. Do they comply to necessary regulations like labor, things like necessary, say, if they're dealing with privacy data or health data, things like that, right?
Sure.
Contractually, are they capable of delivering? And other things can be looked in as more like financial capability. Do they have the reasonable long-term financial capability to support you if you are a large buyer? And if a critical service is being supported from you? The reputation he has already covered.
Right.
Things like strategic alignment. Is this vendor right fit for my organization and my portfolio or my service? Or is there a match? Is there a thinking, wavelength match? Things like that. Credibility in terms of like, does the organization exist reasonably long enough and in business and has ethical practices and so on and so on?
Right. On this, I did the risk assessment for a well-known company called Salesforce. You all know Salesforce? Okay, there's one at least. So it was for Emirates Airline. And the question was, you were absolutely right. We're not able to run an audit in Salesforce, which was really concerning, right? So what we did is actually we asked them to provide us with an audit report on a yearly basis, but we made them agreed that we will pick the auditor. So it will not internal audit, it will be like an external auditor that we will trust and which we will have a business relationship, so we would avoid any conflict of interest. So by doing this, we have tackled as much as we could some of the, let's say, lack of transparency. And it was a win-win as well for Salesforce, because eventually they could use this audit report for other clients. So there was a reduction of cost through the scale. And I think it was pretty interesting to see that they were not necessarily ready. And what you have to understand is that this is like a very new services, even like for this cloud service provider. They are not yet mature, even if the marketing, I would say bullshit, will say, yes, we're very strong, we're the best. The reality will say something different. So as a buyer, and I'm telling you that as a vendor now, is like be strong on your requirements and be bold enough to say no, that you want higher standard. Because eventually, if you're challenging them, you're not the only one that challenged them, other clients will do so, and they will change the way they operate. And I think if I take, I have some experience with Amazon Web Services, and to be honest, I think they are too confident in their infrastructure, and they tend to not disclose a lot of details. And I think that's a mistake. And you can see that already they had some challenges, and now there's Alibaba that is creating its own cloud and willing to be more open to be compliant with the various regulatory requirements. And I think it's clearly a threat for Amazon. So think twice, and I think when you pick a vendor, just assess his willingness to comply with your own requirements and agreed on similar standards.
So if I were to draft an agreement, I insist on including such clauses. And how we deal with these security issues is we don't go to court. We don't want to be dealing with a web of litigation proceedings and all that. It incurs costs. So what you do is when it involves cybersecurity responsibilities, you identify the issues, and you don't go to the basic or the contract, the task. You go to the issues. You identify the issues, you deal with the issues, and then normally what I do is I put a clause, issues resolution. That's one, which deals with cybersecurity issues. And then there will be a dispute resolution. If issues cannot be resolved, you go to dispute resolution. So there are so many ways of doing it before you go to court and you pay legal fees and go for litigation matters. So it is very important to actually have this kind of clauses in the agreement, because at the end of the day, it goes back to the core of it. You're dealing with information. So you have to define what is the information, and there is a need for such clauses given this era. Yeah.
I think it's not common today, but it's a requirement to actually put the security requirements into the contract. The key ones that you would want to put is who in the organization, both parties, would you contact for responsibility and escalations if required. 2, what would be the responsibility of the supplier to inform the buyer if they have any breaches in terms of the service they provide or other services provide, especially the cloud, for example. If your cloud, if the customer's cloud has not been compromised, but another party's cloud has been compromised, you want to also be informed of that. And in case of there's a breach and the supplier needs to assist us for any investigation purposes, the requirement to assist also needs to be there. So they are informed and they will not close their trap, because as suppliers, they will try to cover as much as possible and you don't have direct access to your data. So these are the requirements that you want to consider to put in